Hey, David Brewster here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Alcatrazz, and we're going to be talking about Graham Bonnet's kind of pet side project. And Graham Bonnet's a legendary vocalist, worked with Rainbow and Michael Schenker, eventually worked with Impellitteri and some other people too. But it's really interesting to notice the band Alcatraz, especially their first two studio albums. One featured a very young and fiery, Yngwie Malmsteen, just bursting with shred, in this neoclassical metal direction, and the other has a young Steve Vai, kind of post Frank Zappa, but before he worked with David Lee Roth, and he's just bursting into seams with all these great ideas too. I've always found this era, somewhere around 1983 to about 1986, maybe 1987-ish. I found that era very interesting. There's a lot of great music and some interesting things that happened, in that time frame. And you have to think, Yngwie left the band Steeler with Ron Keel on vocals. Left Steeler and joined Alcatraz. They released a studio album and a live album, and then he flew the coop and started his solo career and released Rising Force in '84. And then Vai was post Frank Zappa. It was right before he started working on the Crossroads movie, and he started working with Alcatraz. And I think it was mostly the attention that Yngwie got. And Steve was trying to kind of erupt in his own way too, and he thought, well, hey, Yngwie got a lot of attention with this Alcatraz band. I'm going to join them too. And both of those studio albums and the live album with Yngwie, but those two studio albums, No Parole for Rock and Roll and Disturbing the Peace, are great. And it's awesome to go back and listen to early Yngwie and early Steve Vai, and you can kind of hear what they were doing. You can hear these little kind of snapshots or little peaks of things that they were going to do later in their career too, which is so inspiring. So if you like this idea of digging around early in their career, definitely check out the Steeler album, with Yngwie, with Ron Keel. I think it was produced by Mike Varney. It was on Shrapnel. And, there's some great, guitar solos, and it's really, kind of an interesting look at Yngwie early on. And then the same thing with Vai. I mean, of course, you can go back and listen to, his work with Frank Zappa. I think, he has like 8 or 9, albums he appears on with Frank, and, studio and live, albums. And then, Vai has some really interesting kind of little things in the nooks and crannies of his career. Check out Public Image Limited, with Johnny Rotten, produced with Bill Laswell, Bernie Worrell's on there. Tony Williams, there's some phenomenal musicians on that, the album from Public Image Limited. All right, with the opening, that was Jet to Jet from No Parole from Rock and Roll. Of course, that's Yngwie on guitar. Really busy riff here too, really interesting. So right there you can see we're kind of playing with B minor 7 right here. And there's a couple different ways you could fret or attempt to finger this. You could also use your thumb too. I've played around with that kind of variation before. But I think I've never actually seen Yngwie play this riff before. I guess I could, look for some live bootlegs or concert footage to see like how he actually fretted that. But I'm guessing he probably did something like that, and grabbed the root note with his middle finger, and then used the other, fret hand fingers to kind of make and shape those chords. So it's loosely based around B minor 7, and he's just pummeling, that root note, the B. So right there, it's like B minor 7, and then right there, it's kind of like B sus4, because you're kind of reaching up and grabbing that B and E note. And then right there, it's kind of like an A over B. I guess you could think of that as B7 sus2 as well, and then B5. So you've got this little melodic thing happening with the chords right there, and then it's just, you know, kind of mashing that root note too. And it's interesting because you're going from this, and then right there you're doing, and you're kind of emphasizing that D to C sharp movement. You know, it's a busy, kind of demanding riff, but I like it because it's so unusual and different. And eventually you'll hear this. And, you know, on top of that, you know, kind of chord progression in the background, that A5, and then an F sharp over A sharp. You'll hear that little melody. You know, behind that, you know, which is very, you know, kind of telltale Yngwie. You got that classical kind of influence in there, but a killer riff and a cool song too. Next example is from the song General Hospital, which is also from No Parole for Rock and Roll, and something like this. Once again, we're kind of using these like partial chords and bouncing off of a root note, which now it's in the key of E. But we're going to start with this. So right there, that's kind of like an E7 sus4 to a partial E5. And then you've got this, and that's A over C sharp. And a C power chord. Little single note, you know, melody right there. It's like a little bit more of the A over C sharp there. And then he does this. And then he basically is kind of answering the first riff, and it's not exactly an octave lower, but it's just a mutation of the first part, which was this. But that second time, when he kind of lowers the riff, then he starts doing this. So right there, you're kind of doing these partial chords. It's like an E sus2 or E7 sus2 and a little piece of E minor. And then you're doing this. So you can think of that a couple different ways. You can think of that A7 over C sharp. You can think of it, you know, a couple different ways there. But you're coming down this. And you got this little... And that last time after you pick through that A7 over F sharp, then just do that same line we had a minute ago. And just end on that E power chord. Alright, one more from Yngwie, and then we're going to make the flip to Steve Vai, but this is Bigfoot from No Parole for Rock and Roll, and it's Yngwie once again. Something like this. starts with that big slide into a B5 power chord, and then he's kind of palm muting, and he's, you know, arpeggiating the chord, and he's doing this. So that's like B5, and then a B7, and then a B5 flat 13. You're going to open up that G string. Really cool. And then you've got this little single note. Like that. And then do that again. The second time you're going to do just a massive pinch harmonic in there. And he's really like, you know, he's squealing the note, and he's also kind of doing that half step bend in there. And that's a really early, like, super squeal. You know, that sounds like something you hear from Zakk Wylde or Dimebag, but it's Yngwie in 1983, which is pretty cool. And then right there, he basically, you know, hits the gas. But there's some slurring in there too, some pull-offs. It's like a little piece of B minor. And at the end, just kind of loop that first pattern, and then just end on that B note right there, and that's the intro. Okay, next up we've got some Steve Vai action from Disturbing the Peace, and this is Mercy, something like this. It's really crafty the way Vai kind of borrowed some of the tonalities from No Parole for Rock and Roll with Yngwie, and then when he recorded Disturbing the Peace, which was technically about 3 years later, he kept some of the same ideas. And I'm not saying he borrowed anything from Yngwie, but I think he was trying to deliver like a signature sound for Alcatraz, because you can hear some of the riffs, you know, are based around these A7 sus4. There's a lot of sus2, these partial chords, you know, working off that open A string and also off the low E string too. So he kind of mimicked some of the riff habits and stuff that Yngwie had. I think he was trying to deliver, you know, a signature sound for the band, which is really smart, you know, where it's like, wow. But when you hear that album, it totally sounds like Steve Vai. He's all over the place, you know, the solos are wicked. But I did notice, you know, like, wow, I think he's trying to capture some of that same sound. And this riff kind of shows that. So right there, he's kind of doing like a partial D to a partial C, and then it's like a G over A. Now, if you want to relate those to A, you could think of that as A sus4, A minor 7, and then A7 sus2. So there's that, you know, 7 sus2 chord, you know, chiming in again. Right there, he's just kind of sliding like a partial A to partial G, you know, kind of a slippery sound. So right there, you're going to do that same series of chords. Right there, open up the D and the G string for a partial G, and then you're playing a D over A, technically, but it's like this D over F sharp shape right there. So that's the first time. Then loop the whole thing, but we're going to end on a giant D5 down here, D5 over A. Here's another one from Steve Vai on Disturbing the Peace, and this is Sons and Lovers, and it's something like this. One more time. in the very beginning, this is a really cool way to start a riff. He's basically grabbing the 19th fret on the high E string and picks that first, and then he grabs the 19th fret on the low E string and picks that and slides down. So you have this kind of attention-getting intro. Something like that. Right there with the chords, he's basically starting with this E5, and getting E7 sus4, and then an A over E. So he's creating this melodic, pattern based with double stops and these, kind of partial chords. You've got like an E sus4, kind of a partial, and then these partial chords walking down. And then you want to loop that first part again. And the last time, just hit this D and then move into E. I think it moves to A, like when the verse starts right there. But that's a cool riff. The last example is from the song Painted Lover, which is from Disturbing the Peace, and definitely very Vai-esque, song and riff and the solo and everything, and the song's great. But there's some interesting things going on with this song. So Vai is actually using a miniature guitar, or a mini guitar. And I'm not really sure who started that. I'm guessing probably Eddie Van Halen with little guitars, using the tiny, Les Paul in concert. And then you see, photographs, and there's a, guitar player cover with Frank Zappa holding a mini guitar. And then Steve Vai, somewhere around 84, 85 started using, the mini guitar. So I don't know really where that came from. But Vai is definitely using the mini guitar on Painted Lover. Now, when I first learned this song, I just learned it by ear, when I was a teenager. And I didn't know he was using a miniature guitar. I didn't know it was in a different tuning. I think it's actually in drop D, but the miniature guitar is a fourth higher than normal. So I didn't know all that. And if you want to, you can actually tune to drop D and put a capo on the 5th fret, and that will make this guitar part a little bit easier. But I'm going to show this the way I originally learned it, which is hard. But here's a little bit more info and kind of a visual to help you understand what this mini guitar business is. And Painted Lover, my way, is something like this. Something like that. And keep in mind, if you use a capo, tune to drop D and capo the 5th fret, that G power chord that I kept moving back to is actually held down by the capo. So that does make that guitar part a lot easier, but I don't really like playing with capos, so forget that. I mean, you can try that if you want. Tune to drop D, capo the 5th fret, and then those bottom 3 strings are going to be that G power chord. But I'm not afraid to shift and, do stuff like this. So slowly we're doing, there's G5 kind of picked out. And then you're going to slide this kind of partial F into a partial G. Pick that G5. Pick that partial F. Grab, this G note and then slide to G. Like that. And then the second time you go through that little partial slide, then you're going to grab this little piece of F sus2 and add that in there. And then right there, he's basically grabbing this F, he's bending it up to G, and then he bends it up to A, but he's using, pinch harmonics. Really interesting. And you want to hover right over your middle pickup if you got a single coil right there. That's a great kind of marker to show you where you're going to pick. Kind of a little, you know, insight or a trick to kind of help you understand where to pick for harmonics like that. After the pinch harmonic, go back to that G. And you're basically, you know, mimicking what you did the first time. And then the last time, he basically slides into this A and grabs that C. And then grab that A, slide up to C, and grab that D note right there on the 15th fret. You know, really interesting riff, and I've always liked that song. It has that cool kind of slinky groove. And once again, I had no idea that Vai was using a miniature guitar until many years later. And then I thought, well, man, that makes that riff way easier, you know, with the capo. And I've never tried it on a miniature guitar, but that would be kind of cool, just to try it like the authentic way. But one more time. This look at the Chords of Alcatrazz, and definitely, you know, an influential band, even though they're kind of overlooked and partially forgotten. I mean, they do have a fan base and a lot of just rabid fans that remember their music and their albums, but they never really exploded. Like, they never had like a super, you know, big hit or anything like that. I think it was just the cast of characters, Graham Bonnet, with these talented musicians, whether it's Yngwie or Vai or other musicians too. But definitely worth checking out if you haven't really heard Alcatraz. And definitely, I'm a big Yngwie and Steve Vai fan. So it's cool to go back and notice, like, hey, that's what they were doing those early days. You know, really cool. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content material. Thank you.